Today, we are going to talk about kind of our ArmCare 101, our key metrics of when you take our exam, what you're going to get out of it. So a lot of people, we're decently new companies, so a lot of people don't really know to the bones of what we're doing here. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to kind of go over what our test is, how it works, the research, and what information as a player you're going to get from this. So as if I'm a father, which I am, if I have a player who's taken our test, these are pretty much what I would be wanting to know. And our experts here are going to let us know. So 101, if I'm at an event or if I'm talking to one of you guys and I want my son to use this program and I don't know anything about it, how am I going? My first question would be, how can I know that I can trust what I'm about to do is legit? So basically, where is this research that we provide coming from? And how can I, as a consumer, know that the report that I'm going to get back about my player's arm strength is legit? So where's this research coming from?
Yeah, I mean, I'll take this. During my time through my PhD, I studied a lot of fatigue, from movement to internal physiology. But one of the things I thought was really interesting is the functional fatigue in terms of arm strength. And what happens when the athlete has throwing arm fatigue or lower body fatigue and how that changes the delivery, which ultimately can increase stress to the throwing arm. But when I spent time with the Angels, I went to Penn Medicine. When I did my fellowship there, we tested athletes' arm strength. I was amazed looking at college athletes and how weak their throwing arms were. And at the time, in general, just gotcha. Relative to their body, you had guys that were like 220 pounds that had a wet noodle for an arm. Gotcha. And then from Penn, I got hired by the Angels, and it was just God's way. It put me in a place where I went to a team that had the most injuries in baseball. That's where I met Jordan. Jordan was already with the Angels, and he's done a bunch of things from specialty programs, running the pitching programs for, our developmental levels and in the AZL. And we did a lot of work together. But I was able to be a part of a research undertaking while I was there that also confirmed, and I have the research paper. If anybody wants it, it's actually free to access. It actually shows that North American professional pitchers have the weakest arms in baseball. Okay. It's out there. Okay. And people are wondering, like, why we got all these injuries? Guys are throwing hard, blah, 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 blah. It is because their arms are weak. We have huge players in North America with wet noodles. Okay. They're outgrowing their arms. They get so big, so fast, and they don't train the arm properly. Right. And at the time, my transition in my role went from, our GM pulling his hair out saying, like, what the hell, man? We had like 11 Tommy John surgeries. Most of our active roster was on the shelf from 17. We did all this biomechanical stuff. I got partly a biomechanics PhD and studied that to hell. And Jordan also, he started doing a lot of hand digitization. We used sensors, and we were able to see fatigability points or changes in the delivery that affect consistency. Jordan laid out all that, but it came with a strength change. Okay. So we brought in sophisticated strength equipment. We had predictive measures in terms of when athletes are going to have more inflammation. We were able to match things in pro baseball. Not only do we know they had weak arms, but we were able to get a report called a treatment report. It happens before an injury report. So anytime a trainer puts hands on guys, you get a treatment report. And the players that were recurringly showing up on the treatment report were going to the injury report because they're getting everything done to try to fight the pain and soreness. But those players were weak. So we were able to look at these things. And so as it evolved, my position, I started looking at ArmCare. I started getting more excited, our company, because we went from the worst in the league to in the top 10. Okay. Within a year, we had no surgeries to our active roster. We cut all our injury list days in half. And then during COVID, we were the only team to not have a surgery to our pitchers in our active roster because we had an airtight strength testing method. We had 2 or 3 years of data to evaluate. Okay. But with ArmCare, I wanted to bring it in for the 21 season and got excited about it because that we couldn't test on the road. all our issues now are coming on the road because we had a structure and a schedule set up at home. Guy comes in, we start testing guys each of the home days. We do it before their bullpen. We're able to assess, hey, today we either skip it or we're cutting it down, or let's let him go. If he's working on a pitch, probably throw 40 in there if he needs to, right? But that really set it on the trajectory to understand better. And in a nutshell, you asked me, like, how do I come together and understand, what does ArmCare do? It evaluates strength. It evaluates fatigability. Okay. It's the only device that makes it easy to test guys' arm strength after games. The other sophisticated equipment, they need a coach, a clinician, someone to run the computer because a player might delete all the data, right? We look at recoverability, the consistency in testing, trying to get 2 a week at least. You're going to see, how does the arm bounce back? Your reliever, try to get it, I might be up the next day. You test again, and it's player led, right? And then you're looking at shoulder balance. Okay, so you got weakness, fatigability, shoulder balance, recoverability. These 4 things is what we need to know. And now in the app, algorithmically, it takes all these metrics and then it starts to create a program to fix these things, right?
Love that.
And,
yeah. So you're able to
benefits,
get that research, live research. So this is everything you have done. So all these metrics that we are giving players has been
other
done,
people,
and you've seen it.
Yeah, there's other people that have researched strength trends in injured athletes. Okay, UCL injuries and stuff, and it's out there.
I love that. We've mentioned this on some previous live streams too, that when Ryan came in, I didn't know it was called a dynamometer, but when I was working at the MPA under Tom, we were doing a whole bunch of things where we did a spring training check, an all-star break check, and then an end of season check. And what we found was the same exact thing: was the athletes that were losing strength over the course of the season got hurt. The athletes that gained strength, we were only looking at dynamometry and IR and ER at the time. We weren't doing grip and scaption, which to me, scaption's like the most important one you can look at. But the athletes that were staying the same, they kind of just stayed the same. But the athletes that were gaining strength, not only did they perform better over the course of the year from start to end, but they stayed healthy as well. Generally, they threw a little bit harder also. But we saw the same things looking at our population with the Angels, as well as even talking to the colleges and the high schools and even the youth players, of going through that whole genesis of our key metrics of arm score, shoulder balance, SVR, fatigue, and really diving into the fatigue stuff is important too. We're not going to get onto that today, but there's tons of groups that have looked at it. Nobody wants to talk about it because it just is basically too easy to understand at the end of the day.
Yep, right.
It's not convoluted enough to say that can be the solution to the problem.
Yeah, they want it to be confusing, but it's not. But no, you guys, you've made it clear that strength matters most. And that's exactly what our programs does. So we will actually identify the throwing muscles in your shoulder, what are the strongest and what are weakest. So I'm a dad. I get my kid, I'm like, all right, cool. I let your guys' research legit. Everything, you have seen it firsthand. Stronger arms, they get healthier. Fatigue, higher chance of injury. I want to see where my son's at. He goes through the test. So just a quick rundown, if anyone's ever done or one curious, or we're testing an internal, we say IR, internal rotation, external rotation, a scaption position, and we do grip as well, all correlating to arm strength. So once you go through this quick assessment, takes a couple minutes now, it's going to spit out a bunch of stuff for your child. So first thing it's going to give you is your arm strength. So a lot of times, if someone says, hey, what's your arm strength? Or usually people go like, oh, what's your bench? So when we say arm strength, what is arm strength? Is that how big my biceps are, which are huge? Are that big my delts? Is it my rotary cuff strength? When I say what is arm strength, what does that mean exactly?
Yeah, I mean, when it comes to arm strength, we're talking something that's seriously global, and there's 2 types of measures. We got absolute, which is, your raw measures. Hey, I got an athlete that's over 300 pounds of arm strength. That's like a squat, right? But then we have to look at the relative strength. So this relative strength, we have to look at it relative to their body weight. How strong are they relative to their body weight? Because it's one thing to say.
I'm stopped right there. So question, you are going to ask how much I weigh before my son, or how much my son weighs before he takes the test. Why does his body weight matter?
Right. So there are 2 important things. These are things that we've seen. And I know we're going to dive deep on one of these metrics. The pounds that's produced by the throwing arm has a greater likelihood of throwing harder. It's more performance driven. So for example, if I increase my arm strength, whether I start at my shoulder at the back of me gets strong, so that means that like inherently my brain, I can move my arm faster because I got the brake system, or the front of my shoulder gets really strong, so now I can accelerate my arm forward faster. You know, those pounds that accumulate, they come with velocity enhancement. I mean, we're putting tons of stuff on LinkedIn, all our social media. You can see the kids have a linear rise in strength as well as velocity. And traditionally, what we've seen is that guys that are strong relative to their body weight, it means they got just more tissue that's contracting around their frame. They're healthier. You know, that's what we saw. You know, that's what we saw with the Angels. Those guys, you know, who had that high relative strength, you know, were healthier. And you know, it's interesting because that's our arm score. Our arm score is a single number. It's actually a percentage of body weight. So if I got 100 arm score and I'm 215 pounds, that means I have 215 pounds of strength in my throwing arm. It's interesting that we're starting to see these things jump up together. So this is amazing. The player's getting bigger. Okay. They're getting heavier because the kids are getting older. They're probably training more. And then their arm strength is exceeding their physical weight gain. Like you can see it in the diagrams. The guy starts at 68 as an arm score, 68% of his body weight. And then he's 84. And he goes from 72 miles an hour to 83 miles an hour.
But his body weight stays the same?
Yeah, the body weight's increasing, I'm sure. I mean, I had an athlete went from 185, had a 55 arm score, and now he's got a 143 and he's 210. Okay, that's just one case and example that you can really get up there when you're really, you know, you wake your arm up, you get strong relative to your body weight. You don't want a big body and a wet noodle. Like my heuristics are like, you know, don't outgrow, outthrow, or overthrow your arm strength. Don't get too big relative to your throwing arm. Don't throw too fast relative to your throwing arm, because we're going to talk about the strength velocity ratio. But then also, you know, don't overthrow. You know, you have to pay attention to your fatigability. Don't give the throwing arm more and more and more. You know, we've seen that all the time, that people, like, you know, we got kids, they're highly motivated. Their arms are hanging, not recovering well. They're fatigued. They're getting weaker. They got imbalances. The kid still wants to pitch a complete game because he's not communicating, right? We have to be in a world that we're communicating. We need to understand these metrics like Rapsodo data or TrackMan data.
Makes
you know,
sense. And we try
just to kind of touch on that, like arm strength aspect, is if you have an athlete that's 100 pounds, let's just say there's two 18-year-olds. One of them is 100 pounds. We're going to use very extreme examples. One of them is 100 pounds. One of them is 200 pounds. And they both have 200 pounds of total strength. They both have the same raw strength, but the 100-pound athlete has much more strength relative to their body. They both throw 80 miles an hour, we'll say. Extreme example, I know. 100-pound athlete, 200-pound athlete, both push 200 pounds of strength. One of them has a 100 arm score. One of them has a 200 arm score. They both have the same SVR because they have the same strength, velocity, everything. Both throw 80, but your 100-pound athlete has more strength relative to their body weight. That's arm score relative to your body weight. So
that's awesome.
And it's also a way to normalize data.
Might be a smaller kid, but his arm strength is technically stronger than that 200-pound kid, is what you're saying.
Yeah.
And that's exactly what our stuff. So we try to dumb it down as much as possible. We want people to simplify it and not go anyone's head. So my son takes a test. First things come is his arm strength. So it is going to test, again, his internal rotation and external, a scaption position, which is hard to see, and grip. So I'm getting my arm strength.
Can I touch on those real quick? Because I think it's going to make a lot of sense. So IR, I always tell guys, that's kind of protecting what your arm's doing after, not just when you're advancing the ball forward, but your internal rotators actually slow your arm down into external rotation. So it's elbow. Your external rotators in an overly simplified version is shoulder health, scaption. And one of the cool things, if you guys have not watched it, go back to our podcast we did with Kaylee Shores. She's at UCF. Congrats to them. They're in a regional. So great job on getting that program going where it needs to go. But what they found was when they're measuring scaption strength, it's highly predictive of strikes for relievers. So not only is it kind of a general overall, viewpoint of how that shoulder is going to be from a health standpoint, but go listen to that podcast with Kaylee Shores. She found some really cool performance metrics that come from scaption strength on a day-to-day basis. And then pinch grip, we do not like a crush, but like we're throwing a four-seam fastball because we want to know how those muscles are working that overlay the UCL.
Gotcha.
But I just wanted to plug in there. Congrats to UCF, big user of ArmCare, huge proponent of what we do. They got into that regional for the first time in a while, and it's a cool aspect to see that program turn around.
Heck yeah, that's awesome. All right, well, that makes sense why we do internal, external scaption and grip. That's great. So once you get all those metrics, we got our arm strength. All right, cool. So my son's decently strong. I see here that I have another report, my shoulder balance. Jordan, what is shoulder balance exactly? If I'm looking at this, what am I looking at?
Yeah, so we're looking at that front side, back side parity. So traditional research says that we want us to be 1/3 stronger on the back side than the front side.
Why?
So this stuff came out when everyone was blowing out labrums and tearing up their shoulders. So I would say in like 1978, 1982, when this stuff started coming out in terms of shoulder balance?
Well, 1982 is the first real kind of known arm care program. It's called like the Job exercises.
And that's when they started coming out with that 1/3 strong on the back, right?
Yeah, they were starting to see that the strength imbalances the strength that the traditional science wanted was a 3-to-2 ratio. So 3, like a ratio of 3 in strength on the front and 2 on the back, but we've reversed that a little bit more in terms of we now want to get, to a level of 0.85.
And the reason I bring that up is when this original thing came out, because everyone's freaking out that we say we want to be balanced front side to back. A lot of people are upset about that. But this original thing came out when everyone was thrashing up their shoulder. And now we've almost trained baseball players so differently that now we're thrashing up elbows, which I want to bring up. And I'm hoping you can touch on this a little more than I can, Ryan. When they're getting into that eccentric phase of layback, how important the internal rotators are. I'm trying to set it up for you to go in because you know a lot more about this than I do and why it's so important. And I think this is why we see so many elbow injuries now.
Yeah, well, you see, that's the thing is that we had shoulder issues that it's starting to flip the other way. You look at an arm care program, any of the people who are watching here, they look at their kids' arm care program, if they aren't using ours, it's like 99% on the back of their body. And, the shoulder injuries in baseball have really come down. The elbows, obviously, the influx has risen. So one of the issues that we did a great, and we do have a piece of it in one of our newsletters where we talked about this mechanical consequence of having an imbalance. So all our injuries happen in deceleration. So obviously the back of the shoulder for rotator cuff tears and those kinds of things, that's deceleration of the external rotators. If you're really strong at the front, you're whipping your arm through and the back is your brakes, you could cause a lot of damage there, right? With that imbalance. However, the internal rotators, everyone keeps thinking it's acceleration, like Jordan's saying. But what happens is if your arm's a catapult, right? Here's my catapult. When I'm loading the catapult back, my internal rotators at the front are the ones that slow my arm down. They decelerate, okay? And what happens is if I can't set up my deceleration, I have too much speed going into layback. Well, the ball is in my hand, and the speed of my layback and the ball and the gravity, it really starts pulling open the hinge, okay? Now, over top of it is your forearm. Those are the springs. That's what's got to control the opening. That's trying to keep your elbows shut. And when I'm really strong at the back, a lot of guys do reverse throws. They're super strong, accelerating their arm behind them. It really sets up a big problem, for the inner elbow. It starts to put a lot more tension on it. And then over time, what happens with this shoulder imbalance where they're super strong in the back, they're super weak in the front, especially if they're using a heavy ball plyo with a weak guy with IR, they're probably going to get fatigued before they even go into a game, is that the grip strength starts going down. And when the grip strength starts going down and the ratios reverse, well, now that spring isn't going to be very good in keeping the elbow shut. You're going to start having tension on the UCL and it's going to end up blowing. eventually.
Gotcha.
Probably.
So we need balance. So
Yeah.
we're testing IR and ER because we want that poundage, what you're pressing, to be decently close to each other.
Yeah,
Correct.
it's
Gotcha.
going to be impossible day to day to be 1.0. I mean, we've seen Jordan and I've seen a lot of guys with 1.0 that we share. That's like, wow, they're completely balanced. We're not looking for that. We know that they need to be in a range of your externals, at least 85% as strong as your internals, and then on the other side, not being more than 5% stronger, okay, with your external relative to your internal. So you don't want your external to be 5% stronger than your internal because of what I just told you. You know, if you had a ratio of 1.2, which I've seen, or 1.3, I could show you, that means their external rotators is 30% stronger than their internal. And those guys, you combine that with a weak grip, yikes.
Gotcha.
And one that's
And
fatigable, yikes.
literally physically impossible to understand as a player if I never did any sort of dynamometry pressure testing to know if which of my muscles are stronger than others.
No idea.
No idea.
Zero idea unless you paid to see a physical therapist, and then they may be able to diagnose it. But everybody's walking around not knowing that their arms are not where they need to be.
Gotcha.
You know?
That makes sense.
Yeah, just to give you an example, I'm going through a player of mine of his last 4 exams, and his shoulder balance was 0.77, 0.82, 0.76, 0.97, and then 0.74. So we see these changes, and that's why it's so important to consistently test so you can kind of know where the guy's at, and you can adjust your throwing and everything as you go on that shoulder balance. And just to give an example of it, this is a player who's starting an intro to a weighted ball program because he needs a little bit extra velocity. And you're able to use that information on the shoulder balance to dictate which balls. And we have more information on that in a lot of our coursework, different things like that. Which also, on a side note, we do have those courses still for sale till I think the next 2 days or something like that on the website.
Yep.
Like 70% off on those, about going over using your shoulder balance and everything with that on those velo programs for whatever that one's called, Ryan. Velo monitoring program.
Yep.
But to give an example on there, I'm going to cover up the name of the player so nobody can see what it is. But he lost, if you can see that, 10% strength. So we had the right amount of fatigue on there, but we see exactly everything Ryan was talking about. High fatigue of the internal rotators, high fatigue of the grip. So I know that whatever I'm going to do with this guy, I got to throttle that back.
Yep.
And that's where that shoulder balance, it was imbalanced a little bit based on his average. So we throttled back, but then we also saw that it was very fatiguing to some difficult muscle groups that we're worried about with that elbow. So now we got to throttle back even more and maybe even wait 2-3 more months to actually start this thing up. So you only know if you test, and that's the only way you can figure it out.
That's awesome. Yeah, you can't feel
way.
it, can you? No, I how many times we've been to practice and you're like, man, my arm feels pretty good. I'm feeling, kind of tired. Maybe something's a little off, but I feel decent. And you don't even know that something is fatigued to a point where you might alter some mechanics or do something that injury risk excels. So cool. So all right, my kids got my arms.
If I can jump on some of the questions, I'm trying to bounce back and forth between like our the Instagram ones pop up elsewhere. So I'm sorry we've missed a bunch of questions. But we have someone asking if they should test at max effort on the isometric press for their fresh exam, or if they should just kind of standard. What do you think, Ryan?
Yeah,
that's what I think too.
You have to have max because these injuries, you got to think about it. Stronger arms are harder to kill. And when you understand your max strength, and obviously if it's going down, that means there's something wrong with your neurological system. If I go in there and it's submax, right, that's not telling me what's the capacity of my arm. You got to think about it. Let's just say I bench press 300 and I only need a 250-pound bench press to win a competition, right? Well, if I bring that max to 450, now that 200 is way less taxing neurologically for me. I could probably do 7 reps with it when I could only do 1. Okay. So we got to make sure, that we focus on max strength. We test on max strength, because if we don't, we run into problems. We had an athlete, high profile guy, didn't want to test his arm strength, chronically getting hurt during rehab, which I hate saying that word, return to performance, and coming back. We had to test max strength on his non-throwing arm, which isn't ideal, but we need to know the nervous system, You're not going to know what, like nervous system, you're not going to feel burning like lactic acid in your arm or anything like that, right? Or soreness, really. What you are going to understand is that, whoa, why can't I contract at that high level? You know, when you're throwing a baseball, especially you're throwing a hard fastball, you know, guys can take it up or down, but the neurological effort's pretty high. We got to know that.
Makes sense. All righty. So, and last but not least, we have arm strength. I got my kids' shoulder balance front to back, and then it is going to give us a strength velocity ratio. I'm brand new. What is a strength velocity ratio?
You can take that, Jordan, because that's something.
Yeah. So this will go back into one of the questions that we had on the guy on the 100-pound athlete and the 200-pound athlete. Someone said, well, was that 100-pound athlete more prone to risk of injury? So this is where I always say arm score for just the ease of use is kind of your short-term evaluator of health. It's a quick, like, who's good to go in the short term. Pair that with shoulder balance. Your long-term look is your SVR. And what I've found with SVR is guys who have a high strength velocity ratio. And when Ryan kind of put the numbers to this was when we were running all the weighted ball programs with the Angels. And what we found was there's not a good or bad weighted ball program. You just have to meet the criteria to maximize a weighted ball program. But guys who are 60% stronger than their velo. So if you throw, again, I'm going to use pitching coach math, make things easy. If you throw 100 miles an hour, you want 160 pounds of total strength in all those measures we take. That means you're 60% stronger. And the reason we want you 60% stronger was the guys who were in that category, whether they were in a weighted ball program or just over the course of the season, not only did they gain velo over the course of the year, but they sustained it over the course of the year. So if you have a low SVR, 3 things can generally happen. And I'm going to list these 3 things out. And if anybody's seen this, throw it in the comments, because this is going to answer a lot of questions for guys that are going, well, why does this occur? And every time I talk to a college, every time I talk to one of our pro teams, they're going, this guy's losing velocity, or he's not sustainable, or whatever these things are happening. I go check his SVR, and they go, oh, yeah, you had a bad SVR. So number one thing on a low SVR, you get hurt really quick. You get into the season, you get into your weighted ball program, you blow out. Second thing, you get a short-term spike in velocity, and then you go right back to where you were. There's nothing that actually sustained it. So everyone's all excited. You break spring training. They finish the fall season, and like, man, Zach Higgins, he's throwing 4 miles an hour harder. And then they start the season, and he's right back to only throwing 96, right? Because Zach's got a good arm. And then the third thing that happens, which is the most common, is you start out at throwing 88 miles an hour, and then you continue the course of the season, and then before you know it, by a month, you're throwing 84. And then another month, you're throwing 82. And then next thing you know, you can't get out of the second and third inning. And then we'll put him into the bullpen, because if we put him into the bullpen, that'll spike his adrenaline. He'll get back to throwing hard. But it's not an adrenaline issue. It's you're just not strong enough to handle the natural adaptation that comes with throwing a baseball, which is range of motion change, strength and length. So SVR is whether you have enough strength to handle the increase in length. So we can artificially increase range of motion, which is why everybody used to love the sleeper stretch and cranking through these things. You feel good for a little while, but then you go right back to where you were. So you need the strength to support the length change that comes with throwing, whether it's a baseball or a plyo ball. One other thing I want to point out on that is if anyone can show me any joint in the human body that benefits from increasing range of motion without the proper strength, I would love to hear about it. I've talked to PTs, ATs, strength coaches, surgeons. Within the last 30 days, I've talked to all these people, and I've said, if you can show me a joint that does that, I'd love to see it. And they go, well, there isn't. Because human physiology is human physiology. If you don't have the strength to support the range of motion increase, you're either going to get hurt or you're going to start to suck really bad. So I don't know if I covered that enough, Ryan, or if I went in a completely different direction.
Love that. That's great. I feel like we could do a whole stream on SVR and the importance of velocity and strength and how they correlate. So now I'll be able
real quick, we also have a guy asking about, is there a difference? Like, what's the best arm care and strength for a sidearm guy? Which it doesn't change. At the end of the day, like the elbow is a hinge joint, right? Mm-hmm. It can do only a couple things, and your shoulder is a mobile joint. It can only do these things, right? So do you want to go in on that, Ryan? To me, it doesn't change. If you're a sidearm guy, you still pay attention to your arm score, SVR, shoulder balance, and you go from there.
I mean, the only maybe real difference, right, for a sidearm guy You still want to have global shoulder strength. You're probably going to work a lot more like fly position, because that's where you're throwing from. But the most important piece, I think, too, is when they test. We have something else called an arm primer. We haven't talked about it, but between our fresh tests, we do like a 1 to 2 minute test where they're half kneeling to give them a checkpoint on a day that's not a high intensity throw day, just to make sure, hey, today I might be long tossing, not intensely, but I do want to know my arm's fatigued. Why am I going to kill it? When a couple days, I might be pitching per se. In that test, we really want to emulate doing our test from our release point. That's where you're gonna engage the most strength through the entire chain of our body. So that's really kind of the main thing, is assessment in that position. But there's not a heck of a lot of difference, for the sidearm guy.
Great observation from a guy who uses the system. He says that he sees people with bad SVRs. They'll hit a peak velo, maybe once or twice. There's not a whole lot of context to it, but they'll hit a peak velo in a game, and then they don't even touch it for a very long time. And again, that's hey, you're hitting that max, and then you go right back to where you were. It's like, oh, there's a flash in the pan, and it gives everyone a little bit of hope, but it's just not sustainable. So we see that from a user who just put that in there as well.
That's great. It's good to see people are using it and putting it to put it to work. So great. Now I got my arm strength for my kid. I know if he's balanced front and back, and I know if he can sustain the velocity based on his strength and his body weight. And then from there, we basically train him. We know what's weak. We know what's strong. We're not going to overtrain what's strong. We're going to focus on what's weak and make him basically stronger. And that brings velo with it. So that's awesome, guys. Well, that's just a quick breakdown of our report. We have a ton of more info on our blogs, YouTube. Ryan does LinkedIn, our socials. So check it out. Questions, shoot them our way. But yeah, let's hammer that SVR next time as well. I think people are curious of how strength can increase velocity versus mechanics. Love that argument. So let's hit that sometime soon. But if you guys got nothing else, I appreciate you guys breaking down that report so people have a little better idea of what we do.